I never thought I would live to see the day when I would be counting the days until my death. Not because of my age, but because of my own family. When you're 67, it seems like the worst of it is over. Your wife's funeral, the pain in your joints in the morning, the loneliness of the long winter evenings. But I was wrong. The worst was ahead, and it came not with sickness, but with a smile on my painted lips. My name is Rufus Holliday. I've worked all my life on the oil rigs 40 miles outside of Wyrick, a tiny town in Oklahoma where everyone knows each other from diapers. For 38 years, I got up at 5 in the morning, ate the same breakfast of eggs and bacon my Doris cooked, and drove my old pickup truck out to the rising sun and the smell of crude oil. Our house, a one-story house with chipped paint on the porch and a creaky gate, stands at the very edge of town. It had once seemed too small for a family, but now it was too big for a lonely old man. After Doris died of lung cancer 8 years ago, I never mustered the strength to make a change. Her pictures still stand on the mantelpiece and her dresses hang in the closet. I'm not superstitious, it's just that parting with things would mean accepting that she's never coming back. Working on the tower is not what kids dream of. It's hard, grueling labor that makes every muscle ache and your hands blister as thick as a dime. But it paid well, especially if you didn't spend the money on booze and gambling like many of my coworkers. I put it away, a little bit every month. First for a house, then for college for Leroy, and then just because I was used to saving money. When I retired 5 years ago, I had $500 to $75,000 in my account. Not millions, of course, but for Werica, a fortune. Doris would have been proud. She'd always say, "Rufus, you're like a squirrel. You keep everything in your hole," and I'd say, "I'd rather have it and not need it than need it and not have it." Except that Leroy, our only son, grew up quite different. Not a spender, no, just soft. Too soft for this world. He inherited Doris's character, just as kind, just as trusting. He was bullied a lot at school, and I tried to teach him to fight back, but to no avail. As my father used to say, you can straighten a nail, but you can't straighten a soul. Leroy didn't go to college, even though Doris and I had been saving for his education. He said he wanted to be like me, work with his hands, got a job driving a long-haul truck. A decent job, no doubt, but I hoped my son would do better. I never told him that, though. It's not right for a father to clip his own son's wings. After Doris died, Leroy visited me less often. First every weekend, then once a month, then on holidays. I didn't blame him. Truckers were rarely home, and what could he do with an old man who could only grumble and reminisce about the old days? And then Ursula Trapp came into his life. She was tall, with sharp features, and a smile that somehow made him feel colder rather than warmer. I'd met her at Thanksgiving 3 years ago. Leroy brought her over to meet her, shining like a polished nickel. "Dad, this is Ursula. We've been dating for 6 months," he said, putting his arm around her waist. I shook her hand, dry and cold, and invited her inside. Ursula looked around at our place with ill-concealed disappointment, as if she'd expected a columned mansion rather than a modest working man's house. "Very cozy," she said, and there was as much sincerity in cozy as in the smile of a used car salesman. At dinner, Ursula talked mostly about herself, her job as a receptionist in an insurance company, her dreams of owning her own business, her plans for the future. She mentioned Leroy only once, saying, "Leroy and I need to save up for a good life." Even then, I sensed something wrong. There was something about the way she looked at Leroy, not with affection, but with evaluation, as if she were assessing how useful he might be. But I kept my mouth shut. Doris always said I was too suspicious of people, so I decided to give Ursula a chance. 3 months later, they were married. The wedding was modest, in the local church, with a small reception in the town cafe. I paid for everything, though Ursula hinted at a larger celebration. "Modesty is a virtue these days," I said then, and she pressed her lips together but didn't argue. At the wedding, I met Mildred Trapp, Ursula's mother. Now I see where Ursula got her temper. Mildred was a carbon copy of her daughter, only 30 years older. The same cold smile, the same appraising glances. A former elementary school teacher, she held herself as if the whole world were her naughty pupil. "Rufus," she told me over a glass of champagne, Leroy tells me you worked on an oil rig all your life. That must have been specific career. I could hear the disdain in her voice, but I smiled. That specific career allowed me to provide for my son and pay for this wedding, Mildred. She blushed slightly and stepped back, and I caught Ursula's gaze, assessing in cold. After the wedding, she and Leroy rented a small house in Wirral. Leroy continued to work as a trucker, and Ursula took a job at the local branch of the insurance company. On weekends, when Leroy was home, they would sometimes stop by my place for dinner. I'd cook steaks, the only dish I was as good at as Doris, and we'd talk about work, the weather, and city news. I noticed that Leroy was changing. He laughed less often, frowned more often, and looked at Ursula as if waiting for approval. She was talking more and more about money. "Rufus," she said at dinner one day, "you're not working anymore. It must be boring sitting at home alone." "I have plenty to do," I replied, turning a steak on the grill. "Gardening, fishing. Sometimes I go shopping with Shannon in Oklahoma City." "Shannon?" Ursula raised an eyebrow. "My neighbor," I explained. "Her husband died the year before Doris, so we keep each other company sometimes." "Oh," Ursula said with feigned interest. "How long have you two been friends?" "Friends?" I didn't bother to explain that Shannon and I were nothing but old friends. Shannon Pickett is the only person in Wyrick I trust completely. She owns a small needlework store and knows everything about everyone in our town. "I'd long enough," I answered dryly. Ursula nodded and changed the subject. "How do you manage your savings, Rufus? There are so many investment opportunities these days. Leroy said you should have a nice pension after all these years." "That's it." I looked at my son, and he was smiling awkwardly, clearly embarrassed by my wife's bluntness. "I'm doing fine," I replied, putting steaks on plates. "I have money for my old age, if that's what you mean." "Oh, I don't doubt it," Ursula said quickly. "I'm just worried about you. At your age, it's important to have a financial safety cushion." I almost laughed. At 67, I was stronger than many 50-year-olds, and my financial cushion would last me several lifetimes in Wyrick. From that day on, Ursula began to pay more attention to me. She called, asking about my health, offering to help around the house. Leroy rejoiced, thinking his wife and father had finally found common ground, and I realized more and more clearly that Ursula was up to something. Shannon warned me, "Rufus, that woman doesn't love your son. She married him after she found out you had a lot of money saved up." "How would she know about my money?" I wondered. Shannon snorted. "Everyone in Wyrick knows everything. Remember when you bought that new pickup truck with cash? Or how you paid for Doris's surgery at the best clinic in Oklahoma City? People talk, Rufus, and people like Ursula listen." I didn't want to believe that the woman my son chose could be so calculating, but soon I had to admit Shannon was right. Last year, just before Christmas, I happened to overhear Ursula and my mother talking. They were sitting on the veranda of Leroy's house, unaware that I had arrived earlier than promised with holiday gifts. "Mom, you have no idea how much money he has," Ursula said, her voice lowering. Leroy told her that the old man had saved almost 600,000. 600,000? What does he spend it on? Sitting in his crumbling house, driving an ancient pickup truck, and wearing the same shirt for years. "I always knew those working men could save," said Mildred. "But how do you plan to get that money? The old man looks strong, could live another 20 years. "You don't have to wait until he's dead," Ursula said, a hint of irritation in her voice. "I've been working on him for almost a year now. Soon I'll ask him to lend us some of the money, ostensibly for a house or a business. He won't refuse because it's about the welfare of his only son, Swananam." "And if he does?" Mildred asked skeptically. Ursula laughed coldly and unpleasantly. "Then we'll have to do something else. I have a plan B, and a plan C if necessary." I walked away from the house quietly, not wanting to hear the rest of it. I got in my car and drove away without going inside. My heart was pounding and my mind was racing with the thought, "Doris, what does our boy see in that woman?" In the evening, Leroy called, asking why I hadn't come. I lied that I wasn't feeling well. I couldn't look my son in the eye, knowing his wife was planning to rip off his father. Over the next few months, I began to notice Ursula's behavior changing. She became sweeter, more attentive. She brought me homemade baked goods, offered to help fix the porch, Even tried to introduce me to her mother's lonely friend. Rufus, you need to get out into the world, she said with feigned concern. You can't grieve for Doris forever. She'd want you to be happy, as if she knew what Doris would want. My wife would have disliked Ursula at first sight. Doris had an unmistakable instinct for phony people. One day when Ursula came back with a pie, ostensibly just to check on her father-in-law, I decided to find out what she really wanted. Ursula, I said, pouring her tea, we've known each other for 3 years, but I still don't understand what you see in my son. She froze with the cup halfway to her mouth. What do you mean, Rufus? Leroy's a good kid, but he's just a simple truck driver from Wairiki. And you're always talking about big ambitions, big city life. Why did you choose him? Ursula sipped her tea and smiled, a smile that never reached her eyes. I fell in love with him, Rufus. Isn't that enough? For true love, more than enough, I nodded. But you don't love him, Ursula. You don't even try to hide it when he's not around. Her smile faded. I don't know what you mean. I heard your conversation with your mother, I said bluntly, about my money and how you plan to get it. Ursula turned pale but quickly pulled herself together. You're wrong. I never said anything like that. Don't lie to me, I raised my voice at her for the first time. I know you're in debt. I know you married Leroy, hoping to get your hands on my savings. But remember, I'd rather burn every dollar than give it to you. She stood up abruptly, spilling her tea. You've hated me since day one. You're jealous that Leroy chose me over you in this dump. You think you know me, but you know nothing. Leroy loves me, and I love him. If you love him, I replied calmly, why are you talking to him like a child? Why do you decide for him? Why make him choose between his father and his wife? Ursula grabbed her bag and headed for the door. Leroy will know what you think of me. Let's see who he'll believe, a loving wife or an old man who can't let go of the past. After she left, I sat at the table for a long time, staring at the unfinished tea and untouched cake. I knew I'd made a mistake in calling Ursula to a frank conversation. I should have kept quiet, pretended I didn't suspect anything. Now she'd go on the offensive, and Leroy would be caught between two fires. Well, I thought, sometimes it's better to know your enemy by sight than to be stabbed in the back. Ursula had shown her true colors, and now I was prepared for the worst. I wasn't wrong. 2 days later, Leroy called me, clearly upset. Dad, we need to talk. Ursula told me what you said to her. Is it true? Is what true? I asked cautiously. That you think she married me for your money? That she doesn't love me? His voice shook with resentment. I sighed. I could lie, say Ursula made it all up, but I wasn't used to lying to my son. Leroy, I've seen her talking to her mother about my money, how she plans to get it at any cost. I'm worried about you, son. You've got it all wrong, he exclaimed. Ursula is just worried about our future, about your future, too. She wants us to have a good life so that our children, your grandchildren, to grow up in decent conditions. Leroy, I said softly, are you sure you're talking about your wishes and not Ursula's? He was silent for a moment, and then he said quietly and firmly, you know what, Dad? I thought you'd be happy for me. Glad I found a woman who supports me, believes in me. But you only see the bad, just like everything else. He hung up without waiting for my response. I sat there listening to the dial tone and felt the chasm between me and my only son growing. A gap dug by Ursula's hands, but in Leroy's eyes created by me. That night I called Shannon and told her about the fight. I'm afraid I've lost my son, Shan. Don't be silly, she replied firmly. Leroy is blind right now, but he'll wake up. Especially when he sees the true face of his wife. And he will, believe me. Men like Ursula can't wear a mask for long. I hope you're right, I sighed. But what if it's too late? Shannon was silent for a moment, and then she said something I didn't want to hear, but I knew it was true. Rufus, you need to be careful. If Ursula is really after your money and realizes that you figured her out, she could be dangerous. Dangerous? I laughed. She's just an ambitious con artist, not a killer. Don't underestimate a desperate woman, Shannon said seriously, especially when there's a lot of money at stake. Promise me you'll be careful. I promised, even though I thought her concerns were exaggerated. Ursula could be calculating and heartless. but not enough to pose a real threat. How wrong I'd been. In the following weeks, Leroy didn't call or visit. I dialed his number a couple times, but he dropped the calls. I learned from Shannon that there were rumors going around town that I'd accused Ursula of fraud and even threatened her. Of course, that was her job. She was turning not only my son against me, but all of Wairika. Don't worry, Shannon reassured me. People have known you your whole life. They won't believe the stories of a woman who's been here a week. But I was worried, not about the rumors. I didn't care what the townspeople thought. I was worried about Leroy. What if Ursula doesn't stop at besmirching my name? What if she decided the only way to get my money was to completely sever the bond between me and my son? It's been almost 3 weeks since Leroy and I fought. 20 days with no calls or visits. The longest we'd gone without contact since he'd grown up. Even when he was traveling around the country with shipments, he called at least once a week. Doris would be upset to know we weren't talking. She'd always say, "Rufus, family is the only thing that matters at the end of the road." It was a cold January morning. I was fiddling with a coffee maker when I heard the sound of a car pulling up. Looking out the window, I saw a brand new black Ford. Too expensive for Leroy with his trucker's salary. But it was him, driving, with Ursula in the passenger seat. I wiped my hands on a kitchen towel and slowly went to open the door. By the time I reached the porch, they were standing there. Leroy shuffling uncertainly from foot to foot, Ursula smiling that fake smile of hers. "Hi, Dad," Leroy said. Can I come in?" I silently stepped aside, letting them into the house. I didn't hug my son like I usually did. I felt betrayed, even though I knew he wasn't the real traitor here. "New car?" I asked as we settled into the living room. Leroy nodded. "Borrowed it on credit. Ursula says we need a reliable car, especially now that we're—" He hesitated and looked at me. He hesitated and looked at his wife. "Sibersubrinon, planning a family," Ursula finished for him with the same strained smile. Leroy would no longer be working long-haul flights. He found a dispatch position with a transportation company in Oklahoma City. "That's it." I looked at my son. "When were you going to tell me about this?" Leroy lowered his eyes guiltily. "I wanted to, Dad. But after our fight, after you accused my wife of being selfish," Ursula corrected him sharply. "It was hard for Leroy to talk to you, but I insisted we come. Family should be together, especially at important moments in life." I couldn't believe my ears. She made it sound like it was my fault, like I was the one trying to destroy the family, not her. "And what was the important moment that brought you here?" "Nana," I asked, looking at my son. But it was Ursula, of course. "We found a house," she said with triumph in her voice. "It's in the suburbs of Oklahoma City. 4 bedrooms, backyard with a pool, great schools nearby." I raised an eyebrow. "Sounds expensive." $550,000, Ursula said proudly, as if it were her own personal achievement to find a house at that price. "But it's a good investment. In 5 years, it'll be worth twice that." I looked at Leroy. "How is the dispatcher going to pay the mortgage on a $500,000 house?" Leroy opened his mouth, but Ursula took the initiative again. "I'll work too. I got a job at a real estate company. I'll sell houses like this. You can make good money on commissions. If you have experience," I said, "and you don't have any." "Sexuson, I have ambition and confidence," Ursula parried. "That's enough to succeed." I suppressed the urge to laugh. "Ambition and confidence are qualities that every other loser in America possesses." "And why did you come here?" I asked bluntly. "To show off your new car and the house you can't afford?" "Dad," Leroy finally spoke up, "we're here to ask for help. We need a down payment on a house. $100,000. The bank will only give us a mortgage if we put 20% down." I looked at my son, not believing my ears. $100,000 is 1/5 of my savings. "And you've already bought a house with no money for a down payment?" I said slowly. "We signed a pre-purchase agreement," Ursula explained. "Sauronana, we have a month to find the money, otherwise we'll lose the deposit." $10,000. "Which you must have borrowed too," I said. Ursula pressed her lips together, but didn't say anything. Leroy looked embarrassed. "Son," I addressed only him, ignoring Ursula. "Do you realize what you're asking? 100,000 is a huge amount of money." "I know, Dad." He looked me straight in the eye. "But this is our chance for a better life. I'll pay you back a little bit every month, I promise. I could see that he truly believed what he was saying. He believes he can pay me and the bank back, believes his new job and Ursula's phantom commission will allow them to live in a house they can't afford. What if I say no? I asked. Leroy was confused, but Ursula was ready for the question. Then we'll have to give up the house and lose the deposit. Go back to the rented apartment. Postpone plans for the kids. She said it as dramatically as if I were depriving them of a roof over their heads, not a luxury home. Leroy, I looked my son in the eye, can I talk to you alone? Ursula tensed. Why? We are a family. We have no secrets from each other. I want to talk to my son, I repeated firmly. It's my right as a father. Leroy nodded hesitantly. Ursula, wait in the car, please. I'll be out soon. She clearly wanted to object, but held back. She stood up, gave me a cold look, and walked out, slamming the door defiantly. When we were alone, I went to the sideboard and got a bottle of whiskey and 2 glasses. Would you like some? I asked my son. He nodded and I poured us each a portion. We drank in silence, like 2 grown men, not father and son. Leroy, I began, do you really want this house? Or is it Ursula's wish? He was silent for a moment, then said, of course, it's more expensive than I'd bargained for. But Ursula is right. We need to think about the future. Children, a good school for them. Will there be children soon? He shook his head. Not right away. First we have to get settled, get on our feet. Ursula wants to wait 2, maybe 3 years. Then why do you want a 4-bedroom house right now? I asked. Why not start with something more modest, saving up for a down payment? Leroy sighed. Ursula says you should invest in real estate now. Prices are going up, and in a couple years we won't be able to afford a house like this. Ursula says, I repeated. What does Leroy say? What do you think? He stared into his glass, avoiding my gaze. I want her to be happy. I want to give her what she wants. Does she want the same for you? I asked quietly. Leroy looked up at me. What do you mean? You quit the job you loved. You went into debt to buy a car you couldn't afford. Now you're asking me for $100,000 for a house you can't afford. All this for a woman who sees you as nothing more than a means to get to my money. Leroy stood up abruptly, sputtering his whiskey. You have no right to say that. Ursula loves me. She wants a better future for us. For you or for herself, I asked. Son, have you ever seen her credit reports? Do you know how much she owes the banks? He froze. What are you talking about? Ursula is in debt, I said bluntly. Big debts. Tens of thousands of dollars. She took out loans from 3 different banks, and now the debt collectors are cutting off her phone. How do you know that? Leroy asked quietly. Everyone knows everything in a small town, I answered, not wanting to give Shannon away. Ask her yourself if you don't believe me. Ask her why she's so desperate to get my money. Leroy was silent, digesting the information. I could see the struggle on his face. He didn't want to believe me, but he couldn't completely dismiss my words either. Even if it's true, he finally said, it doesn't mean she doesn't love me. Maybe she just didn't want to bother me. Or didn't want you to know the truth about her financial situation before the wedding, I pointed out. Think about it, son. Why is she so eager to get the big house? Why does she insist on an expensive car? Why is she always talking about my money? She doesn't, Leroy started to say, but he stopped himself. She's just worried about the future. Leroy, I put my hand on his shoulder. I can't give you that money. Not because I don't love you or I don't want to help you. It's because I know it won't be used for your happiness, but for Ursula's ambitions, to pay off her debts, to satisfy her vanity. He shook off my hand. You're wrong about her. You've always disliked her, always thought she wasn't good enough for your son. I believe you are worthy of a woman who loves you, not your father and his money, I replied. And I will not give my life savings to a man who sees them only as a way to solve her own problems, created by her own recklessness. Leroy stared at me for a long moment, then set the glass on the table. So your answer is no? My answer is no, I confirmed. I'm sorry, son. He nodded as if he'd expected it and headed for the door. I'm sorry too, Dad. I'm sorry you don't believe in us. You don't believe in me. I believe in you, Leroy, I said after him, but not in you and Ursula. He walked out without turning around, Through the window, I saw him get into the car and say something to Ursula. She turned sharply, looked at the house, right at me, and I felt a wave of pure hatred even through the glass and the distance. The car drove away, leaving behind a cloud of dust and a heaviness on my heart. I knew I had done the right thing, but that didn't ease the pain of the growing gulf between my son and me. That evening, I called Shannon and told her about the visit. "You did the right thing, Rufus," she said. "That woman is just using your son." "But I'm going to lose him, Shannon," I sighed. "He's already picked a side." "Give him time," Shannon advised. "When the initial shock wears off, he'll start asking questions, especially about Ursula's debts. You planted the seed of doubt. Now let it germinate." I wanted to believe she was right, but something told me Ursula wouldn't let that happen. She would find a way to convince Leroy that I was lying, that all this talk of debt was just an attempt to ruin their marriage. 3 days after Leroy and Ursula's visit, I overheard a conversation that confirmed my worst fears. I stopped by a supermarket on the outskirts of town, the only place that sold my favorite kind of coffee. Leaving the cart near the dairy department, I went in search of canned tomatoes. As I passed the household chemicals department, I heard familiar voices. Ursula and Mildred were talking behind a rack, unaware of my presence. "He said no, just as I thought he would," Ursula said, her voice tight with rage. "The old miser would rather bury his money in the bank than help his own son." "I told you not to count on it," said Mildred. "He's too shrewd. He sees right through you." "He doesn't see through anything," Ursula snapped. "Just a stubborn old man who doesn't want to share. But that's okay. We have a plan B." "Are you sure it's worth the risk?" Mildred's voice sounded worried. "If something goes wrong—" "Nothing will go wrong," Ursula interrupted her. "It will look like an accident. Besides, we have no choice. The creditors are already threatening to sue, and Leroy is starting to ask questions about my debts." The old man told him everything. "And what did you say?" "I lied, of course. Said I only had a small student loan and a couple credit cards with minimal debt." He believed it, as usual. My husband's not exactly astute. They laughed, and I felt the blood boil in my veins. I wanted to come out of my hiding place and confront them both, but something stopped me. I needed to hear more. "So when do you plan to act?" Mildred asked after a pause. "This Friday," Ursula answered. "I've invited him to dinner. I'll tell him I want to make amends. I'll cook his favorite dish, only with a little something extra. And Leroy, he'll be on the night shift." I told him I wanted to patch things up with my father-in-law, and he was happy. So naive. "What if the old man refuses to come?" Mildred asked. "He won't," replied Ursula confidently. "He loves his son too much to miss a chance for reconciliation. It's his weak spot." I stepped back quietly, trying not to make my presence known. Thoughts swirled feverishly in my head. Ursula was planning to kill me, poison me at a family dinner, like some cheap detective story, all because of money. My money that I'd been saving all my life. As I left the store, I got into my car, but I didn't start the engine. My hands were shaking. I had to do something. But what? Go to the police? What would I tell them? That I overheard my sister-in-law discussing plans to kill me with her mother. Without proof, they'd just laugh at me. Should I tell Leroy? He won't believe it. He'll say I made it all up to smear his wife. After all, he's already chosen sides in this conflict. Maybe I should just not go to the dinner. But then Ursula would find another way. She was desperate about debt, and desperate people are dangerous. I started the car and drove to the only person I could trust, Shannon. She listened to my story in silence. No exclamations or dramatic sighs. She just sat with her hands folded in her lap and looked at me with her clear eyes. "What are you going to do?" she asked when I was done. "I don't know," I answered honestly. "Go to the police? But I don't have any proof." "What if you go to this dinner?" Shannon suggested. "Would you only be willing to go along with her plan?" I wondered. Shannon was right. If I knew about the trap in advance, I could outsmart Ursula, catch her red-handed, get proof of her intentions. "It's risky," I said. "All of our lives are risks, Rufus," Shannon said philosophically. "But if you don't go, she'll just think of another way. And this way, you'll have a chance to put an end to this madness. And I've made up my mind. I'm going to this dinner, but not as a victim, but as a hunter. Ursula wanted to play a deadly game, so I accepted her challenge. After all, I'd lived 67 years in this cruel world for a reason. I knew how to survive. Friday came faster than I expected. All day long, I'd spent my time moving things from place to place and glancing at the clock. The hands seemed to freeze, mocking my impatience. Shannon had called twice, asking if I'd changed my mind. "It's not too late to back out, Rufus," she said. "Anna, I could call and tell her you were sick." But I was adamant. "If not now, when?" Ursula wouldn't stop. "She'll find another way, another time. It's better to face danger head on than to always be looking over your shoulder." "I can handle it, Shen," I assured her. "Don't worry, I'll be careful." "At least take your cell phone with you," she insisted, "and keep it on. If anything goes wrong, call me right away." I promised, though I doubted I'd have time to call if it did go wrong. But her concern warmed my soul. It was nice to know that someone cared whether you lived or died. By 6 p.m., I was ready. I showered, put on a clean shirt and pants, even spritzed on the cologne Doris had given me for our last anniversary. I didn't want to look like I was going to war, even though that's exactly how I felt. Before going out, I took a long look at the picture of Doris on the mantelpiece. She was smiling from the picture. That special smile that was just for me. "What would you do, Doris?" I asked the photograph. "Would you go to dinner with a man who wants to kill you?" I knew the answer. Doris had always been straightforward, fearless. "Meet danger with your head held high," she used to say. "Never show fear." At 7:05, I parked my pickup in front of Leroy and Ursula's house. I was intentionally 5 minutes late. I didn't want to look too eager. The house was lit up. Mildred's car was in the driveway. Leroy's car was gone, which meant he was really on the night shift or something Ursula had lied about. I took a deep breath, checked to make sure my cell phone was on in my pocket, and went to the door. It opened before I could knock. Ursula was obviously watching me from the window. "Rufus!" she exclaimed with the same fake smile she always had. "You've come. I'm so glad." She was dressed in her new dress, her hair styled, her makeup flawless, as if she were not going to a family dinner, but to a presidential reception. "Ursula," I nodded discreetly. "Thank you for inviting me." Come in, come in." She practically dragged me into the house. Mom's already here, helping with the final preparations." Mildred came out of the kitchen, wiping her hands on her apron. She looked no less dressed up than her daughter, in an elegant pantsuit and a pearl necklace around her neck. "Rufus," she greeted me with the same rehearsed smile. "How nice of you to be able to come." "I couldn't pass up the chance to reconcile," I replied, watching their reactions. They exchanged quick glances. Too quick for an unbiased observer, but obvious enough for someone who knew what to look for. "Is Leroy at work?" I asked, looking around. "Yeah, he's on the night shift," Ursula confirmed. "He was so upset that he wouldn't be able to attend our family dinner. But work is work." "Sure," I agreed. "Especially a new job. Can't take any chances." Ursula led me into the living room, modestly furnished, with a worn sofa and an old TV. Apparently, they hadn't had time to spend my money on new furniture yet, or they were saving it for more important things, like poison for my father-in-law. "Have a seat," Ursula suggested, pointing to the couch. "Something to drink? Whiskey? Beer?" "Whiskey, please," I replied. "On the rocks, if I may." She nodded and went into the kitchen. I was alone with Mildred, who looked at me with ill-concealed impatience. "How do you like our house, Rufus?" she asked, breaking the awkward silence. "Modest but cozy," I answered honestly. "Not like the $500,000 house you described." Mildred tightened her lips slightly. "Oh, we lost that house. We had to look for an alternative. But Ursula and Leroy are happy here. It's their love that counts, isn't it?" "Ah, of course," I agreed. "Love and honesty." She flinched a little at the word honesty, but quickly pulled herself together. "You don't trust my daughter, Rufus, do you?" "Should I?" I asked bluntly. She opened her mouth to answer, but Ursula returned with a tray. There were 3 glasses, one of whiskey and ice, 2 of something that looked like martinis. "Here you go," she handed me the whiskey. "Dinner's almost ready. I made your favorite soup, Rufus. Leroy said you love it." I took the glass, trying not to show suspicion. Could the poison already be here in the whiskey? Or was she planning to poison the dinner? Thank you, I said, but I didn't take a drink. Instead, I set the glass on the coffee table. I think I'll have it later with the food. I don't want to get drunk too quickly. Ursula frowned slightly but quickly restored her smile. Whatever you say. Mother, will you help me in the kitchen? I need to take the bread out of the oven. They left and I took a moment to look around. The house was modestly but tastefully furnished, clearly the work of Ursula, not my son, who had never shown any interest in interiors. There were pictures on the walls. Leroy and Ursula on their wedding day. Ursula and her mother on some beach. Leroy by his truck. Not a single picture of me or Doris. It was as if we never existed in Leroy's life. After a few minutes, Ursula called me to the table. I made my way into the small dining room where a table for three was set. Tablecloth, candles, nice dishes. As if it were a special occasion, not the last supper of a condemned man. Sit here, Rufus. Ursula pointed to a seat at the head of the table. You're the guest of honor tonight. I sat down without showing my suspicion. Mildred took the seat to my right, Ursula to my left. The perfect position to watch my reaction. I made soup for the first course, Ursula said, standing up. Chicken with mushrooms. Do you like mushrooms, Rufus? I love mushroom, I lied. I was actually indifferent to mushrooms, but I didn't want to show that I knew about her plan. She smiled and went into the kitchen. Mildred looked at me, nervously rubbing her napkin. You look tense, Rufus, she said. Is something wrong? Nothing's wrong, I replied with a smile. I'm just not used to sitting at the table with you and Ursula without Leroy. Yes, it's a shame he's gone, Mildred agreed. But work comes first, doesn't it? Before I could answer, Ursula returned with 3 plates of soup on a tray. She put one in front of Mildred, one in front of herself, and the last one in front of me. Here, Rufus, she said with a peculiar smile. This one is made especially for you. I've added some special spices. I think you'll like it. I looked at the soup. It looked like a normal chicken broth with bits of chicken, carrots, and mushrooms. But there was something about it that wasn't right. The color was a little strange. A little more yellow than in Ursula and Mildred's plates. And the smell. There was something unusual about the smell. It looks delicious, I said, not touching the spoon. But let's drink first. To reconciliation. I raised my wine glass, which stood next to the plate. Ursula and Mildred raised theirs reluctantly. To family, I toasted. To honesty and openness. We clinked glasses, and I pretended to drink, only wetting my lips. Ursula and Mildred had barely tasted their glasses either, probably to keep a clear head for the upcoming performance. Well, let's try this wonderful soup, I said, taking a spoonful. It smells delicious. I brought the spoon to my lips, but I didn't eat. Instead, I pretended to have something in my eye and started rubbing it with a napkin. Is something wrong? Ursula asked with poorly concealed irritation. An eyelash got caught in my eye, I explained. Just a second. I continued to rub my eye, deliberately dropping the napkin on the floor. Oh, sorry, I said, bending down to pick it up. That's when I heard the phone ring. Loud, insistent. Who can it be at this hour? Ursula said irritably. Could it be Leroy? Mildred suggested. Check it out, dear. Ursula got up reluctantly and left the room. Mildred stared after her, obviously nervous. I took advantage of the moment and quickly swapped our plates while she wasn't looking. Is everything all right with your eye? Mildred asked, turning to me. Yes, thank you, I smiled, taking the spoon again. Let's get started before the soup gets cold. I scooped some soup from my new plate, the one that had been in front of Mildred earlier, and brought the spoon to my mouth. The soup was hot, but quite edible. No strange taste or odor. Mildred took the spoon too, and began eating the soup from the plate that was originally intended for me. I watched her carefully, expecting some sort of reaction, but she didn't seem to notice anything unusual. Ursula returned, shaking her head irritably. Phone marketing, on a Friday night. Can you believe it? She sat back down in her seat and noticed that we had already started eating. How do you like your soup, Rufus? She asked, looking at me intently. It's delicious, I said, swallowing another spoonful, and the spices really bring out the flavor. She frowned slightly as she looked at the plates, but didn't seem to notice the switch, or thought she had imagined it. After all, the plates were the same. I'm glad you like it, she said, starting on her soup. It's an old family recipe. Has your family always been known for its culinary traditions? I asked innocently. Mildred coughed but quickly pulled herself together. Every family has its traditions, Rufus. I'm sure yours does too. Oh yes, I agreed. Doris, for instance, never trusted strangers to cook for her, especially if they had reason to wish her harm. Ursula froze with her spoon halfway to her mouth. What do you mean? Nothing in particular, I shrugged. Just thinking out loud. The soup is really good. We continued eating in tense silence. I tried to take my time watching Mildred. She ate almost all the soup, occasionally wiping her forehead with a napkin. It wasn't hot in the room, but her face was sweating. Mother, are you feeling all right? Ursula asked, noticing this. You're flushed. It's just a little hot, said Mildred. And the soup is hot. She finished the rest of her soup and set the spoon aside. I noticed that her hands were trembling slightly. Ursula stood up, picking up the empty plates. I'll get the second course. Chicken with potatoes and vegetables. I hope you like it, Rufus. She went into the kitchen and Mildred and I were alone. She continued to wipe her forehead, and I noticed that her breathing had become heavier. Are you not feeling well, Mildred? I asked with feigned concern. You don't look well. I'm fine, she snapped. It's just stuffy in here. Why don't you go out for some fresh air? I suggested. Or get a drink of water. I said I'm fine. She raised her voice, at which point Ursula returned with a large platter of fried chicken. So what's wrong? She asked, looking at her mother. Mom, you look awful. Just a little. Dizzy. Mildred gripped the edge of the table. I think my blood pressure's skyrocketing. Do you have any pills? Ursula set the dish down and walked over to her mother, looking at her worriedly. Bag, Mildred said. Her face became even redder, and large drops of sweat appeared on her forehead. Ursula rushed into the living room to get her mother's bag. I continued to sit, watching Mildred. She was breathing hard, wheezing, and gripping the tablecloth so tightly that her knuckles were white. What have you done? She whispered, staring at me with eyes widened with horror. Me? I raised my eyebrows in feigned surprise. Nothing. Just ate the soup you made for me. Or, not for me. She opened her mouth but couldn't utter a word. At that moment, Ursula returned with a small purse. Here, Mom, she began rummaging through the bag. Where are your pills? Mildred did not answer. She suddenly clutched her throat, her eyes rolled back, and she collapsed from her chair to the floor. Mama! Ursula screamed, rushing to her. Mommy, what's wrong with you? She rolled Mildred onto her back and patted her cheeks, but she didn't react. Her body began convulsing, her mouth foaming. Oh my God! Ursula turned to me with a wild look in her eyes. Rufus, call an ambulance, now! I pulled out my cell phone and dialed 911, giving the situation and address. The dispatcher said the crew would be there in 10 to 15 minutes. All this time, Ursula tried to bring her mother to her senses, gave her artificial respiration, heart massage, screamed and cried. But Mildred's condition was getting worse by the minute. Convulsions stopped. She lay motionless, only her chest weakly rising and falling. When the ambulance arrived, the doctors acted quickly and professionally. They hooked Mildred up to oxygen, gave her some injections, and quickly loaded her onto a stretcher. What happened? One of the doctors asked. She just fell, replied Ursula, stammering. Aubrey, we were having dinner and she suddenly felt sick. What did she eat? Chicken soup. Ursula gave me a quick glance. We all ate the same thing. Maybe an allergic reaction, the doctor suggested. Or poisoning. We'll do tests at the hospital. They quickly loaded Mildred into the ambulance. Ursula went with them without even looking at me. I was left alone in the house, surrounded by an unfinished dinner and a heavy silence. An hour later, the doorbell rang. I opened it, and Ursula stood on the threshold. Her eyes were red with tears, but there was fury in them. She's dead, she said quietly. My mother died before she reached the hospital. I didn't say anything, just stared at her. What can you say? I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Any words would have sounded fake. You changed the plates. It wasn't a question. It was a statement. You knew. Yes, I didn't deny it. I happened to overhear your conversation at the supermarket about how you were planning to poison me. Ursula took a step forward, her eyes narrowed. You killed my mother. You're a bloody murderer. No, Ursula, I said calmly. The poison you prepared for me killed her. I was just defending myself. You can't prove it, she hissed. No one will believe that your son's wife wanted to poison you. They'll think you put something in her soup yourself. Maybe, I agreed. But why would I kill your mother? I had no motive. But you had a motive to kill me. $575,000. And I'm sure if the police check your computer and phone, they'll find a history of searches about poisons and their effects, plus Shannon's testimony about your debts and financial problems. Ursula's face contorted with rage. This isn't over, Rufus. You're going to regret this. You destroyed my family. No, Ursula, I shook my head. You destroyed it when you decided that money was more important than human life. She turned and ran out of the house, slamming the door so hard the glass shook. I heard her start the car and drive away, tires squealing. I was left alone in the silence of a stranger's house. The soup that should have been my death became death for Mildred. I felt neither triumph nor satisfaction, only fatigue and heaviness at the realization that one life had been cut short and others forever changed. I pulled out my cell phone and called Shannon. Rufus? Her voice sounded concerned. Are you okay? Yes, I answered. But Mildred's dead. She ate the soup meant for me and died on the way to the hospital. Oh my God, Shannon exhaled. What are you going to do? I don't know, I admitted honestly. I didn't want her dead. I just wanted to stay alive. You have to go to the police, Shannon said firmly. Tell them the truth. Before Ursula came up with her version of events, I knew she was right. I had to act fast before Ursula turned the situation against me. But how could I explain to the police that I'd switched plates knowing that one of them contained poison? Wouldn't that prove my guilt rather than innocence? I'll come get you, Shannon said, not waiting for my answer. In 10 minutes. We'll go to the police together. I agreed, realizing I had no choice. It was self-defense, but would anyone but me understand that? And what would Leroy say when he found out his father was involved in the death of his wife's mother? All I wanted was to protect my son from a woman who didn't love him, and now I could lose him forever. But maybe that was the price I had to pay to stay alive. I apologize for the mistake. The last sentence is really out of the chapter outline, as it hints at a new incident that shouldn't be there. Let's correct the text so that it strictly follows the plan. The news of Mildred Trapp's death spread through Wyrick with the speed of wildfire. By noon the next day, everyone in our little town knew that Ursula's mother had died during a family dinner. The story grew in detail and speculation, passing from mouth to mouth. By evening, some people were saying that I had quarreled with Mildred and hit her, others that she had choked on a piece of chicken. Only Ursula and I knew the truth. The police arrived at my house early in the morning. 2 officers in pressed uniforms and a detective in a gray suit. The detective introduced himself as Clayton Booth, a thin man in his 50s with tired eyes and a notebook in his hand. Mr. Holliday, he began after we were seated in the living room, we need to ask you some questions about what happened last night. I nodded, trying to look calm. Of course, detective. I'll answer all your questions. Were you present at the dinner where Mildred Trapp became ill? Yes, I confirmed. Ursula invited me to the dinner to try to patch things up. We'd had a falling out over, financial issues. What kind of financial issues? Booth started writing something down in his notebook. I told him about Leroy and Ursula's request to borrow $100,000 for a down payment on a house, about my refusal and the ensuing quarrel. And after that, Ursula suddenly decided to make up? The detective raised an eyebrow. Didn't that strike you as odd? I did, I admitted. But I thought it was Leroy who insisted on the reconciliation. He always took our differences hard. But Leroy wasn't at the dinner, Booth remarked. That's right. Ursula said he had the night shift at his new job. The detective made another note. Tell me what happened at the dinner. I described the events of the evening, how we sat down at the table, how Ursula served the soup, how Mildred suddenly felt ill. I deliberately omitted the part about changing plates, saying that we all ate the same thing. Did Mrs. Trapp say anything before she passed out? Booth asked. I paused, deciding whether to mention her last words. What did you do? She asked then. If I mentioned it, the police might suspect me. She complained of dizziness, I finally answered. She thought her blood pressure had spiked. Did she have a problem with her blood pressure? I don't know. We weren't close. Booth nodded, making a note. According to the pathologist's preliminary report, the cause of death was acute intoxication with an unknown substance. Simply put, poisoning. Did you notice anything unusual in the food or drink? No, I lied. Everything looked and smelled normal. And Mrs. Holliday Jr., how was she acting? Ursula was kind. I was careful to choose my words, trying very hard to give the impression of a caring daughter-in-law. Did you notice anything unusual in her behavior? Nervousness? Restlessness? I hesitated again. If I said that Ursula was acting suspiciously, it might put the police on the right track. But without proof, it would only be my word against hers. She was a little tense, I said at last, but I chalked it up to our previous altercation. Booth concluded his questioning with the standard questions about where I had been before and after dinner, whether I had an alibi, whether I had noticed any strange behavior on Ursula's or Mildred's part in recent days. Then he stood up, handing me a business card. If you think of anything else, Mr. Halliday, give me a call. The investigation is just beginning. After the police left, I sat back in my chair, looking at Doris's picture. What would she say now? Rufus, you have to tell the truth. That's for sure. Doris had always been straightforward. But the truth could land me in jail for Mildred's death, leaving Leroy alone with a woman who was willing to kill for money. I picked up the phone and called Shannon. The police were already at my place, I said when she answered. I think they suspect poisoning. And what did you tell them? I could hear the tension in her voice. The truth, part of it, that we'd all been eating the same soup and Mildred had suddenly gotten sick. Rufus. Shannon lowered her voice even though we were on the phone. Do you realize you're withholding evidence? I realize I'm protecting myself, I replied. If I say I switched plates knowing that one of them contained poison, I'll be charged with murder. And if you don't, and they somehow find out the truth, it'll be even worse. She was right, and I knew it. But I also knew I couldn't just turn myself in to the police without trying to protect myself and Leroy. I need proof, Shen, I said. Proof that Ursula was planning to poison me. And where will you find it? She asked skeptically. In her house. She couldn't help but leave traces. The notes, the internet searches, the poison itself. There must be something. Are you out of your mind? Shannon was outraged. You're going to break into Ursula's house and look for evidence. That's illegal. I have a key, I said. Leroy gave me a spare in case something happened to the house while he was on a trip. It's not breaking and entering. But it's still trespassing. Shannon didn't give up. I don't have a choice, I said firmly. If I don't find proof, Ursula might blame me for Mildred's death. And I'm not going to go to jail for defending myself. Shannon was silent for a long time, and I was beginning to think she'd hung up on me. Finally, she sighed. When are you going to do it? Tonight. I know Ursula will be at the funeral home making arrangements for the ceremony. And Leroy, I don't know where he is. He's back from his flight, Shannon said. I saw his car outside a motel on the outskirts of town. I guess he doesn't want to go home. That was unexpected news. Why was Leroy staying at the motel and not at my place or his own house? Did something happen between him and Ursula? I'm coming with you, Shannon said suddenly. I don't want you to get into more trouble. No, it's too dangerous. Sure you will. Rufus Holliday, she interrupted me in a tone that brooked no objection. If you think I'm going to let you risk your freedom alone, you're more stubborn than I thought. I'm going with you, period. I knew that tone. It was the same tone Doris used when she made a decision that couldn't be challenged, and I gave in as I always did. All right, I said. I'll pick you up at 8. The day dragged on endlessly. I tried to do the usual things. Fix the leaky faucet in the kitchen, trim the bushes in the yard, even start reading an old Agatha Christie detective novel, but I couldn't concentrate. My thoughts kept returning to last night, to Mildred lying on the floor, foaming at the mouth, to the fury in Ursula's eyes when she realized what had happened. At 8 p.m., I pulled up to Shannon's house. She was waiting on the porch, dressed all in black, like she was going on a bank robbery. I couldn't help but smile despite the seriousness of the situation. What? she asked as she got into the car. I thought dark clothes would be better for a case like this. We're not robbers, Shen, I reminded her. We're looking for evidence. Which we're going to get illegally, she countered. Well, let's go before I change my mind. Leroy and Ursula's house was dark, no lights in the windows. I parked a little farther down the street so as not to attract attention, and Shannon and I walked to the house. Are you sure she's not home? Shannon asked in a whisper as we approached the porch. Her car's gone, I answered, and the house is dark. She must be at the funeral home. I pulled out my key and quietly opened the door. It was quiet inside and smelled like last night's dinner, a mixture of the aroma of fried chicken and something chemical, unpleasant. Shannon and I looked at each other and walked in, trying not to make any noise. Where do we start? She asked when I closed the door behind us. The computer, I answered. If Ursula was looking for information on poisons, there should be traces, search history, bookmarks, something like that. We went into a small office where an old computer stood. I turned it on, mentally preparing myself for the need for a password, but the screen loaded immediately to the desktop. Apparently, Ursula was too confident in her security to worry about such trivialities. Shannon stood next to me, looking over my shoulder as I opened the browser history. And there we found what we were looking for. Dozens of queries about poisons, their effects, symptoms of poisoning, ways to cover up traces. The queries dated back to the last 2 weeks, just after our fight over money. Oh my God, Shannon whispered. She really was planning to kill you. And quite thoroughly, I remarked, looking over the list. Tasteless and odorless poisons. How to hide signs of poisoning. Heart attack, like symptoms. She wanted my death to look natural. We need to make a copy of this story, Shannon said. Do you have a flash drive or something? No, I shook my head, but we can take screenshots on the phone. We took a picture of the computer screen, capturing any suspicious requests. Then I started checking Ursula's email, which also turned out to be unprotected by a password. Look, Shannon pointed to an email from one Ezra Poole. Order confirmation. Open it. I clicked on the email and saw the terse message. Order number A, 120, 3 confirmed. Payment received. Delivery within 3 business days. No details about the contents of the order, but the date coincided with a period of searching about poisons. We need to find the poison itself, I said, shutting down the computer. Or at least the container, the packaging, anything that connects Ursula to the poison. We began a methodical search of the house. Closets, drawers, wastebaskets. Shannon checked the bedroom. I checked the kitchen. It was there in the back of a cabinet under the sink that I found a small unlabeled glass bottle. There was some yellowish liquid at the bottom, the same color as the strange shade of soup meant for me. Shannon, I called out, come here. She came running into the kitchen holding a piece of paper. I found something too. It's a bill from some lab for organic extracts. $500 for 30 milliliters. What kind of extract could cost that much? The kind that kills, I answered grimly, showing her the bottle. I think this is it. Shannon took the bottle carefully, holding it with 2 fingers. What should we do with this? Take it to the police? And how are we going to explain how we got it? I shook my head. No, we have to find a way for the police to find the evidence themselves. Suddenly, we heard the sound of the front door opening. We froze, looking at each other with eyes widened with horror. Someone had entered the house. The back door, I whispered, pointing to the door leading from the kitchen to the yard. We moved cautiously toward the exit, being careful not to make any noise. But before we reached the door, Leroy came into the kitchen. For a few seconds, we just stared at each other. He with bewilderment, we with the guilty look of uninvited guests caught red-handed. Dad? Leroy finally spoke up. Shannon? What are you guys doing here? I opened my mouth trying to come up with a plausible explanation, but Shannon beat me to it. We were looking for evidence that your wife tried to poison your father, but accidentally killed her mother. Leroy looked at us as if we were both crazy. What the hell are you talking about? Ursula's mom died of a heart attack. The doctors said it was poisoning from an unknown substance. I interrupted him. The police are already investigating. And you decided to help them by breaking into my house? Leroy's face began to redden with anger. What's going on with you, Dad? First you accuse Ursula of marrying me for money. Now you're accusing her of murder? Look at this. I handed him the bottle and printouts of the searches we'd found. Your wife has been looking for information on poisons for 2 weeks. She bought some organic extract for $500. She took me out to dinner when you weren't home and served me soup, saying it was made especially for me. Leroy looked at the evidence, and I could see doubt begin to creep into his eyes. It could be a coincidence. Maybe she was looking for information for some project or... What project, Leroy? Shannon asked softly. No, I don't worry. Why would an ordinary woman be looking for information on tasteless and odorless poisons that cause heart attack, like symptoms? Leroy sat down in the nearest chair, his shoulders slumped. I can't believe it. Ursula couldn't. She's not like that. Son, I put my hand on his shoulder. I know this is hard, but think about it. Where were you that night? Really, at work? He looked up at me. No, I was at a motel. Ursula and I had a fight about money. She said I should claim my share of the inheritance from you now, while you're still alive. I refused, and she kicked me out of the house. Said she didn't want to see me until I came to my senses. And that same night she invited me to dinner, I remarked. Knowing you wouldn't be home. Leroy covered his face with his hands. My God, what am I supposed to do? Call the police, Shannon said firmly. Tell them everything you know, show them the evidence. But how am I going to explain how I got it? Leroy asked, and I heard my own thoughts echoing in his question. Say you found it yourself, I suggested. That I'd come home and started looking for Mildred's papers for the funeral, and instead I'd found all this. Leroy stared at the bottle and the printouts for a long moment, then nodded slowly. Okay, I'll call Detective Booth. But first, I need to talk to Ursula. Give her a chance to explain herself. It's dangerous, Shannon warned me. If she realizes you know the truth, who knows what she might do? I have to hear it from her, Leroy insisted. I have to look her in the eye when she's lying or telling the truth. I understood him. If I were him, I'd want to hear a confession from someone I trusted, someone I loved. But I also feared for his safety. Okay, I said finally, but we'll be close by, just in case something goes wrong. Leroy nodded, and I saw gratitude in his eyes. Not for agreeing, but for not trying to talk him out of it, for not treating him like a child incapable of making his own decisions. She should be back soon, he said. You can wait in the car on the next street. I'll handle it myself. Shannon and I reluctantly agreed. Leaving the house through the back door, I couldn't shake the uneasy feeling. My son was about to have the hardest conversation of his life, a conversation with the woman he loved, but who was not who she said she was, a woman who would kill for money. I knew that right now Leroy was going through an internal struggle, between love and truth, between loyalty and justice. And whatever choice he made, this day would change him forever. Mildred's funeral was held on Thursday, a gray, rainy day, as if nature was mourning another untimely departed soul. I stood in the far corner of the cemetery under an old oak tree, watching the ceremony from a distance. Leroy had insisted that I come, but we both knew that my presence near the coffin would only add fuel to the fire. Ursula had already started spreading rumors that I had something to do with her mother's death. The rain intensified, drumming on the umbrellas of the few mourners. Mildred wasn't popular in Warwick. People like her rarely made real friends. The cemetery was filled mostly with curious townspeople, attracted by the mysterious circumstances of the death, and a few former teacher colleagues who had come out of a sense of duty rather than genuine sadness. I watched Ursula, impeccably dressed in black, with a veil concealing her face. She stood by the coffin, leaning on the arm of Leroy, who looked lost and exhausted. 3 days had passed since our conversation, but he had not yet decided to call the police or confront his wife. I understood him. It's not easy to accuse someone you love of murder, or you think you do. After the ceremony, Leroy noticed me, and apologizing to Ursula, walked over. She gave him a look, and even through the veil, I felt a wave of hatred directed in my direction. How are you? I asked my son as he approached. I'm hanging in there, he answered, looking down at his feet. Ursula, she's not doing well at all. Doesn't eat, hardly sleeps. She cries all the time. I didn't say anything. What can I say? That her tears are an act? That her grief is a mask to hide her fear of exposure? Leroy wasn't ready to hear it. Did you talk to her? I asked quietly. He shook his head. I couldn't. She's in so much pain. I can't add to her pain. Leroy, I put my hand on his shoulder. The longer you wait, the harder it will be. I know. He looked up at me with eyes full of agony. Just give me a little more time, okay? I nodded, realizing it was useless to push. Leroy had to come to a decision, whatever it was. Just be careful, I warned. And remember, you can always stay at my place. He smiled sadly. Thanks, Dad. Yay. I'll call you. Leroy turned back to Ursula, who immediately clung to his arm like a lifeline. As I left the cemetery, I could feel her gaze on me. Cold, calculating, full of malice. The day after the funeral, Detective Booth visited me again. This time he looked even more tired, but he had that special glint in his eyes that comes from a hunting dog that has picked up a trail. Mr. Halliday, he began, settling himself in the same chair as last time. I have news of the inquiry into Mrs. Trapp's death. I handed him his coffee and sat across from him. I'm listening, Detective. The toxicology report confirmed the presence of poison in the deceased system, a rare plant extract that's difficult to detect by conventional methods. Professional work. I kept a cool expression on my face. It's horrible. Any suspects? Booth looked at me carefully. Not yet, but we know the poison was in the soup, the same one you all ate at dinner. But Ursula and I were unharmed, I remarked. Exactly, the detective nodded. It's strange, don't you think? 3 people ate the same dish, but only one was poisoned. I held his gaze. Maybe Mildred ate more, or was she allergic to some ingredient? I know, maybe, Booth agreed without much conviction. Or maybe someone deliberately put poison in only her portion. Or mine, I said quietly. And the plates were mixed up. The detective stepped forward. What do you mean? I decided to risk telling part of the truth, but not all of it. Ursula said she made the soup especially for me, but I was distracted by a phone call at the table, and maybe the plates got mixed up. Why didn't you mention this before? I could hear the tension in Booth's voice. Now, I didn't pay much attention, I shrugged. Soup is soup. What difference does it make which plate you eat it from? It makes a big difference if there was poison in one of them, the detective said. Do you suspect that Mrs. Holliday Jr. was trying to poison you? I paused, weighing each word. We had a disagreement about money. I refused to give her and Leroy a large sum of money to buy a house. She was unhappy. Unhappy enough to kill? I don't know, Detective, I answered honestly. All I know is that Mildred is dead, and the poison wasn't meant for her. Booth made a few notes in his notebook, then looked at me with a new expression. A mixture of professional interest and human sympathy. Mr. Halliday, I would advise you to be careful. If your sister-in-law really was trying to poison you and realized you knew it, she could be dangerous. I'm always careful, Detective, I smiled. At my age, it's a necessity. After Booth left, I sat for a long time, reflecting on our conversation. I'd given him enough information to guide the investigation, but not enough to make him look guilty. Now I just had to wait and hope that the police would find the same evidence that Shannon and I had. That evening, Leroy called. His voice sounded strange, tense and distant at the same time. Dad, I need to talk to you, he said, alone. It's important. Sure, son, I said. Do you want me to come over? No, he said quickly. I'd rather come to you. In an hour, okay? I agreed, wondering what could have happened. Could it be that he had finally decided to confront Ursula? Or had the police found evidence and questioned him? Exactly 1 hour later, I heard the sound of a car pulling up. When I looked out the window, it wasn't Leroy's pickup truck, but Ursula's brand, new black Ford. They both got out of the car. Leroy looked like a man on his way to an execution. Ursula held herself with unnatural confidence. I opened the door without waiting for the bell to ring. Leroy, Ursula, come in. Hello, Dad. Leroy didn't look me in the eye. I'm sorry to come unannounced, but Ursula insisted on coming with me. Of course she insisted. I stepped aside, letting them into the house. Come into the living room. We settled in like the night they'd come to ask for money for the house. Me in my chair, them on the couch. Only now the shadow of Mildred's death lay between us. So, I began, as the silence lengthened, what did you want to talk about? Leroy opened his mouth, but Ursula beat him to it. About you killing my mother, Rufus? I stared at her, surprised at her insolence. Even though she knew I knew the truth, she was still trying to twist things around. Interesting theory, I said calmly. And why would I kill Mildred? Because you knew I'd figured out your machinations. Ursula stepped forward, cold fury burning in her eyes. How you were deceiving Leroy, hiding from him the money that should rightfully belong to him. What shenanigans? I raised an eyebrow. The money I've earned through 40 years of hard work belongs to me, and I'm free to dispose of it as I please. You should have left it to Leroy, she exclaimed, but instead you put them in some secret accounts so that we couldn't get to them even after your death. I looked at my son. Do you believe that, Leroy? He still avoided my gaze. I don't know what to think, Dad. Ursula says she found some documents. What documents? I asked sharply. Account statements, Ursula answered quickly. Offshore transfers, safety deposit boxes in other people's names. You planned everything to disinherit Leroy. I laughed. I couldn't help it. The absurdity of the accusation was too obvious. Ursula, nothing in my life has been more complicated than a savings account at the local bank. I have no idea what offshore accounts are, and the only safe deposit box I've ever used holds my marriage certificate and old photographs. You're lying, she hissed. You've been hiding money for years. And when we asked for a loan, you said no, even though you could have easily given us that measly 100,000. I said no because I knew it wouldn't be for the house, but to pay off your debts, I retorted. The very debts you lied to Leroy about. Dad, Leroy interjected, let's not make accusations, okay? We're here to talk, not to fight. Okay, I agreed. Then let's talk about what really happened the night Mildred died. Ursula tensed, and I saw her hand slip into her jacket pocket. Something about the gesture made me wary. I already told Leroy what happened, she said. You switched the plates. You poisoned my mother. Why would I do that? I asked. What motive? To frighten us, Ursula answered quickly. To show us what happens to those who get in your way. I looked at Leroy, trying to see if he really believed this nonsense. His face was pale, his eyes darting between Ursula and me. Nah, son, I said softly. You don't really believe it, do you? You've known me all my life. Am I capable of something like this? Yeah, Leroy began, but Ursula interrupted him. Don't listen to him. He's manipulating you like he always does. First my mother, now us. He gets rid of anyone who gets in his way of controlling you and your money. My money, I corrected. And if anyone here is manipulative, it's you, Ursula. You married Leroy after you found out about my savings. You tried to get him to demand money from me, and when that didn't work, you decided to kill me. That's ridiculous, she exclaimed, but there was fear in her eyes. Leroy, do you hear what he's saying? He's accusing me of attempted murder. I'm not just accusing, I said, looking her straight in the eye. I have proof, evidence that the police already have. It was a bluff. I didn't hand the evidence over to the police, but I hoped it would make Ursula nervous and make a mistake. What evidence? She asked, and her voice trembled slightly. The search history in your computer. Letters from one Ezra Poole. A vial of poison residue that you didn't bother to hide properly. Ursula's face contorted with rage and fear. You searched my house? Have you been spying on me? No, I answered calmly. The police searched your house, on a warrant, and they found everything they needed to charge you with murder. It was a bluff, but it worked. Ursula jumped up, her hand going to her pocket again. You're lying. The police can't. They can and they have, I interrupted her. Detective Booth was here this morning. They found poison in Mildred's system. The same poison you ordered from Ezra Poole. The same one that was supposed to kill me. Ursula grabbed something small and shiny out of her pocket. I didn't immediately realize it was a knife. Compact, with a thin blade, but undoubtedly sharp. Ursula! Leroy exclaimed, jumping up. What are you doing? What I should have done a long time ago, she gritted through her teeth, keeping her gaze on me. Getting rid of an obstacle. Put the knife down, I said calmly, rising slowly from the chair. It won't help. It'll only make things worse for you. My situation? She laughed hysterically. My situation is already worse than ever. My mother is dead, the police are on my trail, and I'm stuck with a husband who can't stand up for himself and a father, in law, who keeps him on a short leash. Ursula, please. Leroy took a step toward her, holding out his hand. Let's have a talk. This is crazy. No, she shook her head, backing away. What's crazy is letting him destroy us. Step back, Leroy. This is between me and your father. I could see she wasn't bluffing. She had that special expression in her eyes that a cornered animal has, a mixture of fear and determination. She was ready to attack. Leroy, I said slowly, keeping my eyes on Ursula. Call the police. No calls, Ursula shouted, lunging toward me. The knife blade whizzed dangerously close to my stomach, but I managed to pull back. Leroy rushed between us, grabbing Ursula by the knife arm. Stop! Are you crazy? They struggled, Ursula trying to break free, Leroy holding her down. I grabbed the phone and dialed 911, briefly explaining the situation to the dispatcher. Then rushed to my son's aid, but it was too late. With inhuman strength born of desperation, Ursula broke free of Leroy's grip and lunged at me. I felt a sharp pain in my side. The knife had gone in shallowly, but enough to make me bleed. Dad! Leroy shouted, grabbing Ursula again. This time he wrapped his arms around her from behind, pinning her arms against her body. I pressed my palm against the wound, feeling the warm blood soak into my shirt. Not fatal, but painful and dangerous for someone my age. Hold her, I said to Leroy, backing toward the door. The police are on their way. You're both going to regret this, Ursula hissed, wriggling in Leroy's arms. I'm going to get that money anyway, one way or another. The only thing you'll get is a jail cell, I replied, leaning against the wall. I was starting to feel dizzy, probably from the loss of blood. Awesome, for killing your mother and attempting to murder your father-in-law. I didn't kill her, Ursula screamed. You did. You changed the plates. Because I knew you wanted to poison me, I retorted. It's called self-defense. She jerked again, trying to get free, but Leroy held on tight. He had a look of deep pain and disappointment on his face as he finally saw the true face of the woman he loved. Was it true? He asked quietly. Han, did you really want to poison my father? Ursula stopped struggling and collapsed in his arms. I did it for us, Leroy. For our future. He was never going to share with us. He would never let us be happy. Happiness isn't about money, Leroy said bitterly, and it's certainly not murder. You're so naive, she tried to turn around and face him. Without money, there is nothing. No home, no future, no children. Just an endless struggle for survival. I'd rather fight for survival than live with a killer, Leroy replied, and I heard a new note in his voice, a hardness and determination I hadn't noticed before. We heard sirens, the police, and probably an ambulance. My wound continued to bleed, but not as much as it had at first. I pressed a kitchen towel against it, trying to stop the blood. It'll be over soon, I said, looking at Ursula. You've lost. Deal with it. She looked at me with such hatred that I took another step back. It's not over, Rufus. It's just the beginning. You're going to regret getting in my way. There was a knock at the door, insistent, police-like. Leroy jerked his head toward the door. Go on, Dad. I got her. I went to the door and opened it. There were two officers standing on the threshold with their hands on their holsters. Behind them, I could see an ambulance pulling up to the house. Sir, are you all right? One of the officers asked, noticing the blood on my shirt. It will be now, I replied as I let them into the house. It will be now. The hospital walls pressed their sterile whiteness against me. I'd only spent 2 nights here, but it felt like an eternity. The wound was shallow. Lucky the knife hit a rib, the doctor had said. But at my age, even a scratch requires observation, especially when that scratch was inflicted by a sister-in-law who tried to kill you. Leroy sat beside my bed, gaunt, his eyes red from lack of sleep and a stubble he didn't usually grow. He'd aged about 10 years in the last 2 days. Grief and disappointment had left their marks on his face, wrinkles around his eyes, a new bitter crease around his mouth. Detective Booth called, he said, looking out the window at the frowning sky. They had formally charged Ursula with murder and attempted murder. I nodded, feeling neither joy nor satisfaction, just fatigue. We had won, but at what cost? My family's destroyed, my son is broken, and I almost went to the other side of the world. How are you? I asked, though the answer was obvious. Leroy shrugged. I don't know. Empty, like the last 3 years of my life were a lie. Not all of it, I argued. You loved her for real. That was true. But she didn't love me, he said bitterly. I was just a means, a way to get to your money. I wanted to object, to say something comforting, but I couldn't. Leroy was right. Ursula had never loved him. She only saw him as a path to the wealth she thought I possessed. What did the lawyer say? I asked, changing the subject. There's almost no chance of acquittal, Leroy replied. There's too much evidence. The history of the search about the poisons, the emails from this Ezra Poole, the bottle of poison residue, and now an assassination attempt on you in front of witnesses. What about the theory that I poisoned Mildred? Leroy shook his head. No one believes it. You had no motive. Ursula did. $575,000 and a husband who would inherit it when her father died. I sighed. Now that it was over, I felt a strange emptiness. The money I had saved all my life had turned out to be a curse instead of a blessing. It didn't bring happiness, only pain, betrayal, and death. You know, I said, looking at my son, when Doris and I first got married, we had nothing. No house, no car, no savings. I worked construction, she worked at a laundromat, we ate cheap pasta and slept on a mattress on the floor. And you know what? It was the happiest time of my life. Leroy smiled weakly. You never told me. There was no reason to, I shrugged. But now I think maybe it would have been better if I'd stayed poor. If I didn't have that damn money that made Ursula. No, Dad, Leroy said firmly. Don't blame yourself. And don't blame the money. Ursula made her choice. She could have chosen honesty, labor, love. But she chose lies, manipulation, and in the end, murder. It's her fault, not yours. I looked at my son with wonder and pride. When did he grow up? When did he learn to see the world as it is, without illusions and self-deception? You're right, I said, squeezing his hand. Thank you, son. There was a knock on the room door, and Shannon came in with a bouquet of wildflowers. She looked almost as exhausted as Leroy. The last few days had been hard on all of us. I brought you some color, she said, putting the flowers in a vase on the nightstand. There's too much white in this hospital. And some homemade cookies, too. Hospital food is no good. Thank you, Shen, I smiled at her. You're a real friend. She waved her hand like it was nothing, but I saw tears glisten in her eyes. Shannon was there for me in my worst moments. When Doris died, when Ursula tried to poison me, when we were looking for evidence at Leroy's house. She never let me down, never demanded anything in return. I talked to Detective Booth, Shannon said, sitting down on the edge of the bed. They found more evidence. Ursula kept a diary of her plans. Apparently, she couldn't resist the temptation to show off her cunning, even if only in front of paper. A diary? Leroy interjected. I'd never seen her keep a diary. It was hidden under the lining of her jewelry box, Shannon explained. The police found it when they searched it. What's in there? I asked, even though I already knew. Everything, Shannon answered grimly. How she found out about your money. How she decided to marry Leroy to get access to it. How she planned the poisoning when you refused to give the money for the house. Even drawings of the arrangement of people at the table so you wouldn't mix up the plates. Leroy went pale. It's one thing to know your wife tried to kill your father, and quite another to find out she planned it in cold blood, writing down every move. Now the prosecution has everything they need, Shannon continued. Booth says it's a sure 20 years, if not life. 20 years, Leroy echoed. Oh my God. I looked at my son, at the lost expression on his face, and my heart clenched with pain. He didn't deserve this. He didn't deserve a wife who married him for his money. Didn't deserve to witness murder and attempted murder. Didn't deserve to lose 3 years of his life to lies and manipulation. Leroy, I said softly, it wasn't your fault. You couldn't have known who she would turn out to be. But I should have, he replied bitterly. You tried to warn me. Shannon did too. Everyone saw through her but me. Love is blinding, Shannon said philosophically. It's not your fault you loved and trusted. It's her fault that she betrayed that trust. Leroy nodded, but I could see that her words brought him no comfort. The wounds caused by Ursula's betrayal were too deep to heal from a few kind words. I was released from the hospital the next day. Leroy insisted that I stay with him for a while, for he was afraid to leave me alone with my wound. I agreed, though reluctantly. The thought of living in the house where Ursula was planning my murder was unpleasant, but Leroy needed company even more than I did right now. The house felt foreign and empty, though all the belongings were still in their places. The police had taken the computer and some papers as evidence, but otherwise the house looked the same as before. The same pictures on the walls, the same curtains on the windows, the same couch in the living room. But the atmosphere had changed. It was now a house with ghosts, not real ghosts, but ghosts of lies, betrayal, and unfulfilled hopes. Leroy and I established a routine. He went to work. He found a position with a local transportation company, not as lucrative as a trucker, but more stable. I took care of the house, cooking, cleaning, watering the flowers Ursula loved, or pretended to love, so much. Shannon stopped by almost every day, bringing news from the city and fresh-baked goods. A week after I was released from the hospital, Ursula's preliminary hearing was held. Leroy and I attended, sitting in the back row of the courtroom, trying not to attract attention. Ursula looked gaunt and aged. Prison does not make even the most beautiful women beautiful. She didn't look in our direction, focused on her lawyer and the judge. The hearing was short. Ursula's lawyer tried to get her released on bail, but the judge refused, citing the severity of the charges and the risk of escape. Detective Booth presented the court with key evidence: the toxicology results on Mildred's body, the poison bottle, the search history, Ursula's diary. It was more than enough to send the case to trial. As we were leaving the hall, Ursula finally noticed us. Her gaze met mine for a moment, and I saw in it not remorse, not shame, not even hatred, just cold calculation. She was still thinking about how to get out of it, how to use the situation to her advantage. "Did you see the way she looked at us?" Leroy asked quietly as we walked to the car. "Not an ounce of remorse. People like her aren't remorseful," I said. "They're just sorry they got caught." We were silent the whole way back, each of us in our own thoughts. I thought of Doris, of how she had warned me against being too suspicious of people. "Not everyone is self-serving, Rufus," she had said. "There are some who love for nothing, for no reason." She was right, but I was also right to be suspicious of Ursula. I only wish Leroy had heeded my warning sooner. At home, Shannon was waiting for us with a hot dinner and news. She'd found a good lawyer to help Leroy with his divorce. In circumstances like ours, that shouldn't be difficult. Murder and attempted murder were considered sufficient grounds for dissolution of marriage even in conservative Oklahoma. At dinner, Leroy was unusually silent. He picked at his food with his fork, without lifting his eyes from his plate. Shannon and I exchanged concerned glances, but didn't dare break his reverie. Finally, he raised his head and looked at me. "Dad, I want you to know. I never laid claim to your money. It's yours. You earned it with your own labor. I never—" His voice trembled. "I never thought of it as mine." "I know, son," I said softly. "I never doubted it. But now," he took a deep breath, as if preparing to jump into cold water, "I'm asking you to change your will, to disinherit me." I stared at him in amazement. "What? Why?" "Because I don't deserve that money," Leroy said firmly. "I was blind and stupid. I didn't see the true nature of the woman I married. I didn't listen to those who loved me and wanted to protect me. I put you in danger because of my naivety." "Leroy," I shook my head, "it's not your fault." "It was my fault," he interrupted me. "Maybe not Ursula's fault for turning out to be like that, but for not heeding your warnings, yes. For putting her words before yours, yes. For letting her manipulate me, definitely yes. I looked at my son with a mixture of pride and pain. He was taking responsibility for his decisions, even if it hurt him. That was the act of a real man. You don't have to punish yourself, Shannon said softly. We all make mistakes. It's not a punishment, Leroy objected. It's correction. I want to start a new life. No lies, no manipulation, no waiting for an inheritance. I want to earn my own money, build my own life, and know that everything I have, I've earned through hard work. I looked at my son and saw in him a reflection of my younger self, just as stubborn, just as determined. Maybe he had inherited more from me than I thought. All right, I said at last. If you're sure, I'll change the will, but on one condition. What? Leroy asked warily. I'll leave you the house, not the money, just the house, so that you'll always have a roof over your head, no matter what happens. Leroy hesitated, but then nodded. Okay, I'll take the house, but give the rest to charity or whoever you want. How about a scholarship fund? Shannon suggested. For kids from Wariki who want to go to college but can't afford it. I looked at her with gratitude. It was a great idea. The money that almost caused my death would now help young people build a better future. I like that idea, I said. What do you think, Leroy? I think it's a great idea. He smiled genuinely for the first time all day. Doris would approve. Yes, I agreed, feeling my heart grow warm at the thought of my wife. She would approve. The next day I called my lawyer and made an appointment to change the will. Old Jebediah Firth was the only lawyer in Wyrick and had handled my legal affairs since I bought the house 30 years ago. He didn't ask any unnecessary questions, just made the changes I requested, the house to Leroy, the rest to the Doris Holliday Memorial Scholarship Fund. Are you sure? He asked me when I was signing the new will. It's a lot of money, Rufus. I'm sure, I replied firmly. This money has brought too much grief. It's time for it to start bringing joy. That evening, while Leroy was at work, I sat on the porch of our house, the house that would soon be his alone, and watched the setting sun. It colored the sky of Wairiki in shades of red and gold, reflecting in the windows of the neighboring houses. Shannon sat next to me, wrapped in her shawl as the evenings grew cooler, and fall was making its mark. What are you thinking about? She asked, noticing my pensive look. Money, I answered honestly, about how strangely it affects people. For some people, it's an opportunity to help others. For others, it's power. For others, it's freedom. And for people like Ursula, it's the meaning of life, for which one would do anything, even murder. Money only enhances what's already in a person, Shannon said. It makes the generous even more generous, the greedy even greedier. You're probably right, I agreed. But it's still weird to think that a few numbers in a bank account can change people's fates like that. It's not the numbers that change fates, Shannon said softly. It's the choices we make. Ursula chose greed and deceit. Leroy chose honesty and responsibility. You chose generosity. I looked at her with gratitude. Shannon always knew how to find the right words to comfort and guide. In a way, she reminded me of Doris. The same directness, the same wisdom, the same ability to see the good in even the most dire situations. And you? I asked. What choice did you make? She smiled, looking at the sunset. I chose friendship, loyalty, to be there for those I care about, in good times and bad. I took her hand, dry, wrinkled, but so warm and secure. Thank you, Shen, I said quietly, for everything. We sat in silence, watching the last rays of the sun disappear over the horizon. The day was ending, but I knew that tomorrow would bring a new one. And maybe it would bring less pain and more hope. For me, for Leroy, for all of us. The money I'd saved all my life had almost cost me that very life. But now that the storm had passed, I felt strangely relieved. It was as if I'd gotten rid of a heavy weight I'd been carrying for too long. The money had never really belonged to me. It had only been temporarily entrusted to me, to serve a higher purpose one day. And as I looked up at the darkening sky, I could have sworn that somewhere out there, among the first stars, Doris was smiling, approving of my choice.